It's very scary for me to, have that in the back of my head that I can still be pulled over and even maybe deported.
The two operative words here now are stunned and saddened. I love my church, but I think they made a poor choice of a group to go against.
We ought to be thinking about ways to make, the Congress work for working and middle-class families again.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thanks a lot for joining us. It's Tuesday evening, June 26th. A lot to cover in the next 60 minutes. First, show me your papers. Supreme Court, as we told you last night, ruling on the controversial Arizona immigration law yesterday. Not a good sign. Well, the fallout continues, and everybody seems to say it was a victory for them. We're going to tell you who really came out ahead. We'll also tell you what it'll mean for the election season. And next, a political court. Well, after the decision came down, if you paid attention to the dissenting opinion here, it raised more than a few eyebrows. The highest law of the land is supposed to be apolitical. We all know that's not exactly the case, but they're not even just tiptoeing over the line lately. They seem to be leapfrogging it. Has the answer to that question of the political nature of the court not just changed, but substantively changed in recent years? And later, the Vatican report. The Vatican cracking down on, of all people, nuns, saying they're not doing enough to tamp down and speak out on homosexuality, birth control, etc. We're going to hear from one sister who's devoted her life to the church, and she says the Vatican has made a big mistake on this one. And then we'll tell you which races to watch. It is primary day if you're a New Yorker, and we're going to tell you which races could really change the face of Congress next year. All that and a lot more is coming up in this edition of RFL, but let's begin with the fallout from the Supreme Court's decision on the so-called Show Me Your Papers law. And we begin with our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, who's in first position.
Well, Rich, 24 and more hours after that decision yesterday, with the ink barely dry on that ruling from the Supreme Court when it comes to Arizona's immigration law, both law enforcement officials and immigrants who are here both legally and illegally say they're baffled as to how to proceed. Arizona officials and residents are now trying to figure out what the Supreme Court ruling means for them.
Today's decision cries out for comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level.
Last night, opponents of the law gathered in Phoenix to hear from law enforcement officials.
The Phoenix Police Department will enforce all laws,
El Departamento de Policía de Phoenix va a enforzar todas las leyes,
including Senate Bill 1070,
incluyendo SB 1070,
in a manner
de una manera
that is ensure equal justice
asegura una justicia equitativa para todos.
Under the law.
The Supreme Court struck down the bulk of Arizona's immigration law, but for now the controversial Show Me Your Papers provision can stand. Arizona law enforcement officials can continue to check the immigration status of every person that's stopped or arrested. But going forward, states cannot make it a crime to be in the U.S. illegally, and they can't enact any laws that interfere with federal policy. So the big question for law enforcement officials is, now what? After Arizona officials check immigration status, there's little else they can do. The Supreme Court's ruling means that states still cannot deport illegal immigrants, only the federal government can. Raul Gonzalez works with illegal immigrants.
They're not going to leave. They will stay here. They're going to fight. They're going to take action.
And while the dust settles, people around the country, immigrant and non-immigrant alike, reacting strongly to the news.
This is a good victory for law enforcement, for our country, for the state of Arizona.
No, I'm staying here to struggling, and fight back against this unfair law and this racist law.
It is good to have this immigration law. So many people came over here and just paying no tax if they are not legal citizen.
Arresting someone just under suspicion that they might be illegal is just profiling.
The Supreme Court is depending on the fact that police officers use reasonable suspicion when they ask someone about their immigration status. And it definitely opens up the problem, though, that people are going to be racially profiled.
The Hispanics are going crazy. We're receiving calls, text messages. They're panicking of what's going on.
It's very scary for me to, have that in the back of my head that I can still be pulled over and even maybe deported.
On Long Island, there are more immigrant entrepreneurs than there are native-born Long Islanders. And of course, there are many immigrants create jobs. They don't take them away, they create jobs.
It just really, really scares me these types of laws and rhetoric.
So between the president's new policy on young undocumented immigrants and the Supreme Court ruling, immigration may now be front and center on the presidential campaign trail, at least until Thursday when we get the ruling on health care, Rich.
I want to talk about the politics of it and Romney's answer or non-answer when it comes to where he stands on this one. But Richard, I'll start with you, and I'll bring in our panel on this. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author, and Richard Brodsky, former Assemblyman, senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU. You saw Joe Arpaio, the sheriff many people know from Arizona, who never seemed to mind at a camera. But anyway, he claims this is terrific. Jan Brewer, the governor of Arizona, who was presided over this when it was written into law, she also said a victory. But the Obama administration, every Latino organization, it seems, says this is a major rollback. Translate this. What did this ruling yesterday really mean?
Well, there's a big disconnect between the law that was being decided and the discussion and the politics of the law that's dominated since the Supreme Court ruled. This was a very narrow legal question. Could a state do something in a field that the federal government has primacy in? Now, you can agree or disagree, but it did not go to the question, is this a good thing or a bad thing? What naturally has happened is whether or not you like the law, you're judging the decision based on that.
But it certainly seemed to restore a lot of the authority back at the federal level, and they took it away from the states. I mean, there's still one open-ended chapter of this, I grant you, but still, it did seem to be a rebuke to Arizona. Don't overstep your bounds.
If you call it a rebuke, you're all of a sudden personalizing it. What it was a legal ruling on preemption by state law, by federal law of state laws. It's an old and boring subject. What's not boring is the political consequence, not just in terms of the president versus Joe Arpaio, but the way in which the Supreme Court itself opined about it, some of the things they said.
And I want to get to that one. But Dominic, one guy who's been quiet on this while everybody has claimed victory has been Mitt Romney. And today he had a political surrogate go out and he was pressed and for 5 minutes avoided the subject about whether or not his guy, Mitt Romney, was behind the law in the books in Arizona or not. At a certain point, he's going to have to answer the question, won't he?
Perhaps Mr. Romney finds himself between a rock and a hard place on this one, with the Latino vote up in the air for grabs. He's already behind the 8 ball. Romney.
But by huge margins, 30, 40 points. It's just how small a margin, especially for the border states, right?
But yes, but on this one, and what we're looking at is spin gone out of control. There is no possible way that Governor Brewer Jan Brewer in Arizona can claim this is a victory. 3/4 knockdown, only 25% standing, and that 25% the court made crystal clear can come up for review before the Supreme Court or before the court system. So where's the victory in that? It's a victory for Obama, and it's a bad news day for Mitt Romney.
You agree?
You know, I don't really think the outcome of the ruling changes anything that much when it comes to the election in November. It's not going to change a lot of minds when it comes to whether you want a hard fist against illegal immigration, you're probably going to vote Romney. If you think that, you know, immigrants should have a path to citizenship, you're probably going to vote Obama. I don't think the ruling changes anything.
I do think, though, one thing, Andrew, is we talked about in the show, Romney clearly tacked right in the primary, and he basically was saying for self-deportation, among other things, and he thought the Arizona law was pretty good. He was trying to clearly tack back to the center in the general now, and he's mum on the subject. I don't know how much longer he can...
It's the imaging that's going to impact more than the actual ruling is. Romney sitting on the fence on this.
I either was with Arizona here where I can say, show me your papers here, and basically I'll decide if you don't look the part, you could go the other way, or I thought it went too far. He can't really have a third round.
But he's doing that across the board, and he's reinforcing the notion that he doesn't stand for anything, and he would have been better off taking a firm position that actually got a couple of people irritated with him than looking like he's trying to be everything to all people. This is going to have a political consequence. It's going to matter with the Latino vote, and it's going to matter with people who look around me and say,
well, the
take
Latino
a damn
vote is
position.
just about gone for Mitt Romney anyway. But it doesn't. This doesn't help President Obama either, because it again gives the impression that, you know, he's on the wrong side of a decision. It could certainly be spun that way, or that he's been inactive, or that he's been inactive, or that he's been inactive when it comes to
immigration. But it shows that he was fighting against an unfair policy for Latinos.
Something.
But I think that didn't get the unanimous ruling.
Get your comments into the next 48 hours, because come Thursday, no one's going to talk about this.
Yeah, it's the other part.